Hello and welcome to the bonsai garden. Now that the wintry weather has gone, there are a number of jobs around the garden that I need to take care of, and in particular there are some trees that need repotting and also need their roots checking. I've got here in front of me my Japanese maple butterfly grove, and this particular planting I've had now for about 3-4 years, and it was grown from 6 individual trees that I bought cheaply at the local supermarket, and for the first 2 years those were grown in a plastic training pot and repotted after 2 years into this ceramic pot. And I haven't looked at the roots of this particular composition in that time, and I can see that it appears to be rising up, particularly the central bit seems to be lifting up out of the pot, which suggests to me that the roots have started filling the pot. So I'm particularly keen to get in here and have a look. Also, perhaps about 2 years ago, I did see vine weevil on the wall near where this particular bonsai was sat. So I'm eager to have a look under this moss as well and find if there are any nasties lurking in there and get rid of those. So it's certainly time to have a look and investigate what's going on under all of this moss. So here's the tree. The first thing I need to do is remove any decorative elements off of there, prevent those getting damaged. And the next thing I need to do is look and see, is the tree secured into the pot, and in this case it isn't. So I'm going to first of all remove this surface layer of moss. And there's quite a thick mat of moss on here, and you can see where some of the roots from the trees have grown up into the moss because the moss is holding moisture, and it's just sat on here as quite a thick carpet. Now there is a particular window of opportunity for doing root work on your trees, and what you have to bear in mind is what's happening with the tree biologically. And at this time of year the tree is just coming out of dormancy, and what's happened over winter is that the chemical compounds that were contained within the leaves were reabsorbed back into the tree, which is what caused the leaves to change colour and then to be abscised or dropped from the tree. That energy is then pulled down into the trunk and stored, and effectively creates an antifreeze in the tree that helps it survive over the winter period. Then once the tree starts waking up and coming out of dormancy, that energy is flushed back up the tree and causes the buds to start swelling. What happens then is that the buds will begin to open and develop into leaves, and there is a brief period where the tree isn't so heavy with regards to the amount of water it takes up. As soon as those leaves fully open, the tree will start expiring, and so the water taken up by the tree becomes more increased. What that means is the tree will need a well developed and functioning set of roots to make sure it can take up that water. and what that means is it will need more of these small feeder roots in order to do that. So you don't want to be taking the feeder roots off of the tree just at the point where the leaves are beginning to unfurl and open up. At that point it starts demanding more water. So what you need is the point at which the buds are beginning to swell, but before they've properly opened out. That's an opportunity then to trim back the roots, which gives the tree several weeks to replace those feeder roots before the leaves fully unfurl and start making greater demands on the tree. So we're at that point at the moment. The buds, we can see tiny little buds on here. They haven't started opening yet, and this is really the right time to take the tree out of the pot, have a look at the roots and do root work on it, and that's what I'm going to do. I can see in here at one point there was a rock in here to provide a little bit of landscaping in the pot, and that's actually been completely covered over now by this map of moss. So I'm just going to take that out. As I'm doing so, I'm just keeping an eye out for weevil grubs as well. A couple of years ago I did see an adult vine weevil on the wall near to where this particular tree was, and I suspect that this big mat of moss would provide good cover for those. And also, the more organic substance you have in your soils, the more likely you are to get those kind of problems. And what you don't want is vine weevil in there, basically chewing away at the bark which surrounds the main roots, and then potentially killing off your tree. I think there's some weeds in amongst this moss which will also put out some roots, so I'm just dealing with that as well. And I can see all along the surface here I've got feeder roots that were growing in the vicinity of the moss to take up more water. Also, what I've got in here was, in order to secure the trees into the pot, I took some bamboo skewers and wired those together to give myself a lattice framework to secure the trees to in the pot. Now, here we go, just lifting the trees up and taking a look underneath there, and I can see the roots are beginning to circle a little bit around the outside of the pot. So my main job today is to just unfurl some of those and then just trim them, and also just take a little bit off the bottom and refresh the soil. So I'm just going to lift all of that out of the pot. I'll just put the pot on one side. One of the things I always worry about with these forest compositions is that the roots have sufficiently sort of meshed together to give you a coherent whole, and that when you lift it out of the pot it isn't going to just sort of disintegrate. You can see if I pick two of those trees and just lift it, that's fairly solid, so that's good. Now all I'm going to do at the moment is just work my way around the outside and just tease away at these roots. I'm also going to work away a little bit at the top, just to try and expose a little bit more of the nabari of these trees. So the soil is quite high around some of these. And the good news is that so far I haven't seen any grubs in there. Now, this tray that I'm working on is actually a mortar board from a local hardware store, and the sort of thing that you would usually use for mixing cement, that kind of thing. And for these larger trees, it's great for doing this repotting work and just making sure that it contains any mess. You can see here, that's one of the bamboo skewers which is no longer required, and those are going to degrade over time, and they're just useful initially to help secure the trees into the pot. So just working my way around some of the bamboo skewer. See if I can get that out. And this is a bonsai composition from my early days in bonsai, and I can see that there is still quite a lot of compost in the soil mix which I used at the time. I'm moving more and more towards using a greater mix of non-organic components in my soil, mostly molar clay, and to some extent I want to try and trim out some of the roots underneath. And I just have to be careful that I don't remove too much of this, and that causes the whole thing to start disintegrating really. Okay, so you can now see that I've got all these long feeder roots. I can go through. I'm going to go around the periphery of the trees and just snip back anything which has grown quite long. So bear in mind the purpose of this exercise is not to actually put this into another pot, but to trim back the excessive growth in the current roots and encourage more feeder roots, and then put this back into the existing pot with refreshed soil, which should invigorate or reinvigorate the trees. So I'm just going underneath and just trimming off the edges and the longer roots underneath. And what we should get is over the next, say, 3 or 4 weeks, we should start getting new feeder roots developing from where I've cut. So we're effectively creating ramification in the roots in the same way that you would expect to do in the branches. So I just lift that up and take a look, see what I've got. So I've just got a couple of straggler bits on the end there, so take those off. Rotate the thing round. So my great concern was that I was going to find that there might be bugs in here, and fortunately that doesn't appear to be the case. I'm just cleaning up 1 or 2 roots that are growing close to the surface, and I'm relatively happy with that. I think possibly I might benefit from moving this particular tree in ever so slightly. So let me see if I can do that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut this portion out, cut a little bit of soil here so I can move it closer to the other trees. And what I might find is that I'm going to hit the bamboo skewers I used to secure the trees together. Give myself a little bit of space around the tree. I don't want to remove too much of the roots that are feeding that tree. So now we've got a little wedge of soil. The tree's got quite a lot of feeder roots in there. And what I want to do is just nibble away a bit at the edge of the soil here, so that when I put this tree back into the pot, I can position it closer to the other trees. I just want to take a little bit more of there. So I'm just preparing my pot now. I give it a little bit of a rinse out to get rid of the old soil that was in the bottom of there. And also I just need to create a couple of little butterfly clips to hold in the potting mesh to stop the soil from falling out through the holes in the bottom. So just creating a couple of little butterflies out of wire. And just feed those through the bottom of the pot. Okay, so that just serves the purpose of stopping the soil from falling out through the hole. Now, because this composition is quite weighty, I'm not concerned about it falling out of the pot, so I'm not going to worry about retaining wires in there. So I'm just going to add some soil into the bottom of the pot. And this is mostly made up of molar clay, aka cat litter, and also mixed in there is a little bit of pine bark, I believe, and also pumice and a small amount of perlite. So what that gives me is a free draining mix. You can see the trees will just nicely sit in there. I've given myself a little bit of room around the edges of the tree, so just give it a little wiggle to settle that down. Make sure the soil goes under the roots. And I've got my additional tree here, which now sits a little bit closer to everything else. And I'm just going to fill around the edges of the pot now with soil. So the variety of maple that I used in this composition is a Japanese maple butterfly variety. I always say that as individual trees, the butterfly Japanese maple is quite a pale, insipid tree. It's actually a variegated tree, which means that its growth habit tends to be slower. Any variegated plant is going to have less chlorophyll in the leaves, which means that it just processes slower. I'm just looking, perhaps that tree is a little bit close to the edge, so I'll just shuffle that over a little and just reposition that in the pot. So variegated Japanese maple or any other plant is going to process much more slowly because it's not photosynthesizing as effectively as a non-variegated tree. However, I found that as a group composition, this one is particularly pleasing, and I find that in autumn time it takes on a sort of pink hue, which I find really, really beautiful. And although this was one of my first bonsai efforts, and probably quite inexpensive to put together, it's one of my favourites. So this is one that I've seen through from its inception. A number of my other favourite trees are actually trees that I bought rather than developed myself. So I do feel quite some satisfaction in how this particular one has developed and how it looks. So I'm just going around the edges now, settling down that soil and making sure it goes in quite compact. So the trees themselves, some people criticise forest groups or group plantings, saying that a lot of people put immature trees together, whereas perhaps those trees might benefit from being left to develop and thicken up. Now, because I favour smaller bonsai, I'm quite happy with how this one looks, and also the ramification on the branches. I'm really quite pleased with how that's developing. And this is how it looks now, but imagine how it will look in 10 years time. So the trunks will thicken up over time, albeit much more slowly than if they were planted in the ground, or even if perhaps they've been left to develop individually. But the whole thing is in scale, and the look I'm looking for here is a grove of trees growing on a hillside. Also, a lot of people might be throwing their hands up in the air in horror at the idea that there are 6 individual trees making up this group. Now, some of those trees actually are multi-trunk, like this effort. So it's a question of really, how many trees are you looking at? Are you looking at 6, or are you potentially looking at 7? I'm not overly concerned about that, to be honest. I think that would just be being nitpicky. So I now need to dress this with some moss, and because this moss is growing quite thick, what I'm going to do is take the mats of moss that I've got and just trim off as much of the underside of that as I possibly can. So I remove all the stuff that looks black so I can see the lighter area above it. And the look I'm going for inside with this composition is a sort of light and airy copse of trees on a small hill. So I'll give this bonsai composition perhaps about a month, and then I'll start thinking about feeding it. What I don't want to do is, whilst new feeder roots are developing, I don't want to provide any kind of feed to that which potentially is going to burn the roots. So I need to allow those to develop and mature up a little before I start applying fertiliser. So that's this big mat of moss. Cut this up into smaller sections and apply them individually. And I'm just pressing that so it adheres to the soil. And this moss is serving two purposes really. Firstly, it helps create that impression of grass and a grassy knoll. The other is that it's going to help retain moisture in the soil and prevent this from drying out too quickly in dry weather. And some people aren't really great fans of applying moss unless it's for a show. Well, I have no intention of showing my trees. I do like the aesthetic appeal of adding moss to bonsai trees. It just helps create that sense of scale and the impression that it's grass or plants growing around the trees. And I think once I've applied this, what I will do then is I'll just go through the moss from above and just trim again. In all likelihood, what will happen is next time I come out, the blackbirds will have been at it and thrown it everywhere. Now that the weather is beginning to warm up, I've held off from doing jobs on my trees until it got warmer and until the threat of frost and icy weather got abated. I've got a number of jobs that I need to do. I've got a number of forest groups which have trees in them that need replacing, so I will be doing those jobs over the next coming days, and there will be videos of those. So by all means, hit the subscribe button and you'll be able to see the work that I do on those trees and group plantings in future videos. I'm just pressing this down and it's adhering quite nicely to the soil. And I don't need to worry too much about making sure I cover all of the soil, because the moss will grow and fill in the gap. And having done this, I'll be able to happily leave this tree or this bonsai composition for perhaps another 2 years before I need to worry about doing anything else on it. So I did say I would go through and just give it a little bit of a haircut. So there we go, and I just need to add the finishing touch, which is my little mudman sat on the hill just enjoying his bonsai. So here's the finished thing. It's looking a little bit tidier. And here's the huge mass of moss which came off. So despite the fact that the tree is already covered in moss, I was able to remove all of this excess, and part of that is what was rising up out of the pot, and I can use that on some of the trees. Of course, the final job, as ever, is to water the tree to help get it established in the new pot and send it on its way. So I hope you found that useful or entertaining. If so, please hit the like button and think about subscribing to see future videos. Thank you very much, and hope to see you in the next one.